All right, good evening. We're going to get started here. This episode of the Disruption Lab is filmed in front of a live studio audience. I'm here with Nick Love. Nick, your journey from medical student to entrepreneur, I think, is a very inspiring story. Can you share a pivotal moment that led you to the transition and the creation of Love Life Sciences?
Yeah, so I could take you on the journey of how I became an entrepreneur, and that was a little before medical school, but I think it's pretty pertinent to what we're doing, right? So when I was about 10 years old, my mom was diagnosed with HER2-positive breast cancer. Essentially, at the time, it was incurable, and went to several doctors, and she was enrolled in the clinical study at KU Med right down the street. She was enrolled in the study for the drug called Herceptin, which ultimately ended up saving her life. Now the drug Herceptin is world-renowned, saved millions of women's lives. And that was my first introduction into medicine, right? And so that drove me down this path of being interested in becoming a physician because, what else could you possibly want? And so I went on to undergraduate at KU as well and was doing work on medicinal chemistry, developing cancer therapeutics in Dr. Blake Peterson's lab, and was presenting some of that work at the KU Cancer Center. And Dr. Carol Fabian, the physician who treated my mom, came up to my poster and was just talking to me. And that was a moment that I sat there and realized, she isn't just treating patients. She's not seeing a patient and getting them out of the room for 15 minutes. She's doing clinical trials. In fact, she is so involved in this entire process that she is all the way down to the drug development side and the poster presentations around this. And so that was a really emotional moment for me. It really was. And she had no clue who I was, right? But she was everything to me. She was the reason why I was looking at medicine. And so from that moment, I realized that there is a huge spectrum of work that has to be done to get medical innovation from the concepts that I was working on and developing to patients and impacting their lives, right? And here was this individual doing all of those things. And so as I had continued down my path of going into medicine and innovating kind of on the cancer therapeutic side, I developed a company, I co-founded a company, Research Funding Network. And the entire premise of this company was to assist in funding companies trying to spin out of universities the tech transfer process. There is this gap in funding, it's this valley of death trying to pull these technologies out of universities. And so we were applying cryptocurrency and blockchain fundraising to this now about a decade ago, really before Bitcoin was really a big thing. We were helping develop the legal implications of these securities, these tokens, right? Got accepted to medical school right around the time where we were talking to venture capitalists about funding and was told by KU Med, hey, you can do one of these things, but you really probably can't do both. And we were being told by the venture capitalists, hey, Nick, you're either all in or you're not. And so at the time, I thought, I have bigger aspirations than just this one company, and moved on to medical school and put Research Funding Network on the side. Now there's companies doing that exact thing and tremendously successful. But that was definitely a point in my life I look back at and go, I am never making that mistake again, right? So about a couple years into medicine, I started to look at the impact that I could have on people, right? Because the way I've started to value my impact is making the most positive impact on the most people possible. And as a practitioner, somebody that sees patients every day of their life, and that's their core business, you're really seeing, maybe 15 patients a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year for arguably 40 to 50 years of your working life. And that was a number, right? And I didn't like the size of that number. It was not the impact that I had seen in my life. And so I went on to get my MBA in the middle of medical school. It was doing some work again back at the KU School of Pharmacy for medicinal therapeutics, and came up with a concept for Multipen, our multi-dose device that time gates access to injectable drugs so patients can't overdose or underdose on injectable products. Met my co-founder Bradley shortly thereafter and realized that, what we were building, Love Life Sciences, had much bigger legs than we thought it would. And so I don't think there was just this one moment of flipping the switch. I think it was this culmination of all these events that led me here.
So I ask a lot of founders this question, and I'm always amazed by the spectrum here. You talked about, the experience as a 10-year-old that kind of motivated you to get into medicine, become a physician, those types of things. Did you have any entrepreneurial experiences younger? Was the entrepreneur there earlier than the first startup that you did?
Yeah, I think, it was the entrepreneurial spirit, but it wasn't necessarily the entrepreneur. I was kind of the weird kid that thought about things differently. And I think that very much leads you down this path of entrepreneurship, about building your own path and thinking about problems in a different way. So no, there wasn't really one significant venture until freshman year of undergrad, when I started building a t-shirt company, because this is an interesting thing to do. But yeah, nothing really. It's just this thought process.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is an important element of is do you think about what do we always say? True entrepreneurs fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
Yeah.
And it's that different way of thinking, I think, that sets a lot of them apart. So it's not uncommon to hear that. So from a society and a culture perspective, Nick, when you have the product that you guys have taken to market, what kind of cultural or human insights went into kind of the design, this human-centered design, for the product?
Yeah, so patient centricity was everything in the development of Unipen, right? So our single-use injection device that's now on the market. It's interesting because when we initially started developing Unipen, being patient-centric, right? We went to some pharmaceutical companies and we were saying, hey, this is the device that patients want to use. And they said very frankly, we don't care. What's the bottom line? And that was a sentiment I did not support. I don't like that way of thinking. I don't think that's really what innovation should even be about, right? And so how we went about developing Unipen was we had seen this problem set where patients weren't taking their injectable medications consistently, right? It led to a lack of the drugs making the positive impacts that the patients needed, or it was causing worse side effects of those drug products. And so I had seen that in the clinic with my patients. And so when we went out to set out and develop this device, there's dozens of injection devices out there, auto injectors. You guys have probably heard of Ozempic and Wegovy. You've probably heard of Humira, insulin pens. There's tons of these products. Why would what Love Life Sciences is building be any different? The answer is we asked patients, we didn't ask Big Pharma. And so we set out and we produced a 392 patient study with patients administering 3.6 injections on average per week across 37 different injectable drugs. So a tremendous amount of data we collected in this study. And what we found were that, auto-injector devices are tremendously better than having to dose medication out of a vial, mess around with needles, and do all of that stuff. There's no question about that. But we found that patients were not adhering to their medications or taking their medications consistently because of two primary pain points they were facing. The first was how quickly needles were being inserted into the skin, right? It causes bruising at the injection site. And that was preventing patients from consistently taking those medications, but was also causing anxiety because there's kind of this point of no return where they start pressing the device and then it goes, right? It just kind of shoots. So that was problem set number one that patients were having with their products. The second was how quickly or slowly medication was being administered out of the device. When it was too quick, there is a bubble that forms underneath the skin that can be pretty painful because the medication doesn't have time to dissipate away from that injection site. The flip side of that, it can be very slow. Some of these devices can take 15 seconds to administer the entire dose. And if you really want to think about what 15 seconds is, just sit in silence for 15 seconds. You don't want to do that. And so what was happening was patients were lifting this device off the injection site thinking, oh, it's been 15 seconds, and it had been 5. And it was shooting medication out of the device still. And so while that wasn't pain, that was anxiety, because now the patient knows they didn't get their entire dose, and they're not going to get the impact that they need to treat their illness or their condition. And so, patient centricity is everything. We ran human factor studies, so we put the device in patients' hands, asked them their feedback, required patients to use the device without instructions for use and with instructions. And so it was all built around the people that are just using the product.
Have you had the opportunity, I assume you have, but talk a little bit about, have you had the opportunity to measure those outcomes, on the other side of this?
On the adherence side?
Yeah, on the adherence side, on the outcomes in terms of, sticking to the treatment that's been assigned to the patient.
Yeah, so our device hasn't been on the market long enough to collect the long-term data that you would generally look at for those types of endpoints. Give me a year and I'll come back to you
All right,
and
perfect.
tell you how that looks.
No, perfect. So we started out talking about entrepreneurship. I kind of want to take a step back and kind of cover that again. What were some of the unexpected hurdles that you faced as you got started? What were some of the things that, an entrepreneur can relate to, or that, you maybe were unforeseen that kind of hit you in the face?
Yeah, I think there's a level of naivety that you have starting out on these journeys, particularly in a highly regulated space, in a highly lots of litigation and lawsuits going on, like all this stuff is happening in the space. And so in the first steps, we were very naive. We were looking at the top of the mountain and going, oh, it's right there. And it was a false peak. And the actual real mountain's up here. Well, no, the real one's up here, right? And so we were taking small steps up this faux mountain that wasn't there. It was just a peak. And so there's a lot of problems that happen throughout every phase of the development of the product, the regulatory pathways. I think one of the most interesting ones, at least from my perspective, I think things are interesting that probably most people don't think, was that the patient-centric component of our device, right? We thought initially, well, this is kind of a problem for pharma, right? We were looking at that market and going, well, we can't enter this market because it's not adapting to what pharmaceutical companies are really saying, which is money, 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 money. And so we were down and out. We were going, what do we do about this? And it turns out building our product to be patient-centric to solve this patient problem solved an entire problem set for a completely different market that we weren't looking at. And so that ended up being the compounding pharmacy space, where there are no injection devices and patients are overdosing on injectable drug products every day. And so it was actually a problem that we couldn't enter one market, but turned out that because we had developed the device to be patient-centric and therapeutically agnostic, patients can administer the drug product out of the device regardless of what drug product is in it. And so because of that, we can apply our device to compounding pharmacy markets, clinical trials markets, even generic drugs markets, where we just wouldn't have thought about those different markets if we had gone down the regular pharmaceutical pathway.
I'm always compelled, I find it interesting in your space in particular, where you have these major incumbents, like you have these, large established, like you said, money, money, money. What's your view, for startups that are in your field, how do you balance that? Am I disrupting? Are they my acquisition targets at some point? What does partnership look like? Or do I need to stay? How do you manage that competitive balance when you have such established players in a highly regulated market like that?
Yeah, it can be incredibly difficult to figure out when the right time to reach out to those larger partners is, right? We reached out very early on, and they said, no, you are not there. You're not even close, right? But there was also a point where we were hesitant to reach out to big groups, and it was probably past the time that we should have as well. And so I think it takes a lot of introspection, a little bit of trying to determine what the level of risk is in reaching out to those large partners. Because medical injection devices is an area where there's tons of intellectual property, right? And so if a pharma giant wanted to, they could come in, identify us, and just squash us by throwing a random lawsuit on us for no reason. Right. So it's a very interesting dynamic of figuring that one out. Ultimately, there's no right answer. It's more of just what's the market you're going after, who is playing in that space, and does it really matter that you reach out to the biggest person in the field, or should you actually be reaching out to some of the smaller players first, because you can actually service those players, right? I think we ran into an interesting situation where we were at a client site visit, and they're doing a tremendous amount of injectable products a year. And when push came to shove, they sat down at the table and they said, here's the dollar amount that we're willing to give you. Can you guys produce this? And we said, nope, we can do about 1/100th of what you guys are asking us for. And they said, well, then you cannot fulfill this. And so that was a time where we kind of shot our shot, and we weren't even playing the same game, right? So working with some of the smaller players can absolutely be beneficial, particularly in building up to playing in the big game.
I think that's important for founders to hear that, beachhead strategies often are just where can you establish a foothold? Where can you establish, and thinking that you need to go after the big fish versus, I always call it the coalition of the willing, who's willing to partner with you, who is maybe doesn't have the resources and could use the partnership, those kind of things. When you got the feedback, when you reached out and they were like, hey, you're not ready yet, was it that dog doesn't hunt, or was it here's what you need to do before you should come back? Like, was it constructive feedback, or was there those moments of discouragement where you're like, oh, I'm never going to do this based on what you're hearing from the other side?
Well, I'll definitely tell you, it's a moment of discouragement when you were told you can't take this incredibly large contract, right? That would basically make the company and all those things, right? But what was encouraging was they were saying, they put money on the table, right? They said, look, this is a deal that we would like to get done. We're willing to commit capital to this project. And so that was incredibly incentivizing to go out and start building what they were expecting us to build, right? They also kind of said, look, you can prove your product, right? Prove the device on the markets, build out that manufacturing capacity so that when you come knocking again and we're ready for that product, you can actually service at least a significant portion of what we're asking you to do.
From your understanding in that moment, was it, if I don't get this now, someone else is going to get it, or was it that proactive step on your, on your outreach to say, I am the only one in this conversation right now. I know what the hurdle is, and now I'm incented to go do what you just described.
Yeah, I think there's always a level of competition is behind your shoulder, right? And what's interesting about our markets is we had first mover advantage, particularly in the compounding pharmacy space. And so we weren't concerned about another competitor stepping in and taking out right away. But we were concerned that if we couldn't service this particular group, right, they would move on, and an injection device like ours really wouldn't be in the catalog that they would offer, because they're still going to be making money. They're still going to move on, and there's new projects that they're going to pursue. So timing, as you were talking about earlier, is very critical, even not just for the innovation of the company that you're building, but even for the specific deals that you were trying to get done. Timing does become everything. So even though there wasn't competition in our markets, we're looking at the pharma markets going, gosh, these guys could come in if they wanted to, which there's no incentive for them to do it. But if they wanted to, they absolutely could. They could fill this contract, and it's theirs. So yeah.
Yeah. What's VC look like in your space? You just raised a pre-seed round, I believe.
Yeah.
What was the approach you took to gaining that interest? How competitive is the venture field in the space that you're in? Walk me through that a little bit.
Are you talking Midwest investment or kind of U.S. investment? Because those are two different.
Yeah. Let's start with. I assume you started locally.
Yeah. So that's where all of our money's come from.
Okay.
So yeah, we kind of going through our fundraising process, right? We raised a friends and family round on WeFunder, if you're familiar, right?
Yeah.
Because again, we thought, let's shoot our shot, let's go after the big guys, right? Let's go to the Sequoias, let's go to the Y Combinators, without having raised any money, without having a strong business model or a team, and very clearly no responses to our cold outreach emails, right?
Sure.
Go figure. You could throw a million darts and maybe one of them they'll respond to you, but is that response going to hit? Probably not, right?
Right.
And so we raised friends and family, and so WeFunder allowed us to go and raise about $125,000 from people that supported our initiative just locally. And so we ended up being on the top raised list for WeFunder and got to raise a little bit more money there. But that was kind of the kickstart that we needed, right? From there, we raised predominantly from angels for every single one of our rounds. Kansas, we're located in Kansas, has a tremendous tax credit for investors that I encourage everybody just to go and look at. The Kansas Angel Tax Credits is one of the most incredible programs for investors across the United States. And so we were able to leverage that to not only garner interest from Kansas-based investors, but from investors outside of the state as well that could sell those credits and reinvest those dollars if they needed to, right? So that is how we kind of raised predominantly a large portion of our capital, was meeting angels. And it wasn't at your here's 50 angels in a room, go talk to them kind of things. It was, here's a friend of a friend who kind of knows something about investing, or here's somebody that's interested. But it was also me working with physicians at KU Med, for instance, right? Where they're asking, Nick, where are you going to go practice? And I was telling them, I'm building a company, I'm not going to practice. And so there's a lot of interest just from the medical community in investing in those medical technologies that they run clinical trials for, that they do work with every day, that they prescribe to their patients. And so I think that for anybody out there looking at building an angel group, focus on the large hospital systems in your area if you're trying to garner interest for life science investment, because there's a tremendous amount of capital there that wants to invest in technologies They just don't know where to look.
Yeah, definitely. What kind of feedback, did you get feedback in that investment process that kind of either altered your approach or made you rethink maybe the way you were thinking about going to market or thinking about how you were developing the product?
Yeah, so one of the great things about building a company in the Midwest is generally it's Midwesterners that are looking to invest and not invest, and they want to give you the best guidance and advice at the end of the day. They're not bad people here, right? And so even the investors that said no, they would tell us why no, and they would even tell us in some cases, how do we fix those problems, right? Even investors that were later stage than us, right? Again, those early stages, you don't know who's Series A, Series B capital versus seed, pre-seed. And so we were talking to investors and they're going, look, the strategy for raising money anywhere is de-risk. Every single time you go raise a subsequent round, you need to have de-risked these three things, right? So pre-seed, it's can you build the product? Is the team there? All of those things. And maybe your seed round is can you get through the regulatory scrutiny and patents? And then your Series A is does the market accept the product? And Series B is can you scale, right? And at each one of those steps, just de-risking the process makes it easier for you to get money from investors because that's all they're looking for, right? So yeah, the feedback was tremendous locally. Even some of the directors of our local angel groups and the local venture capitalists that weren't even interested in medical devices necessarily gave us great feedback about vertical integration versus horizontal integration in the earliest days, right? You're pitching a medical device company, you assume you have to be vertically integrated from day one. Turns out that's not the case at all. You can build an entire business model around being horizontally integrated, and then as you go and raise more money and de-risk the business, you can add pieces of the puzzle to your core repertoire. So yeah, we got some great guidance.
That's great. That's great. I mean, if you're a founder and you're thinking about raising money, I would encourage you to hit pause, rewind, and just listen to what Nick talked about. Because when we talk about setting milestones and understanding what an investor is looking for in whatever round you're raising, those are the types of milestones that we're talking about. It's not in-game outcomes of the company they're looking for. They're looking for what do you hope to accomplish in the next 18 to 24 months that is going to de-risk this company, de-risk this investment, and allow us to then add investment and continue to grow.
And I think that's interesting because in our earliest slide decks, if you haven't gone back and looked at your first slide decks, you're missing out on some great comedy. Because gosh, it's a completely different business. But in our earliest slide decks, we were pitching, Unipen being applied to these blockbuster drugs on the market, and our projections were crazy. And then as we started getting much more granular in our business model, how we're going to apply the device, you could see how you could get to those crazy numbers. But it's not tomorrow, it's not next year, it's over a period of time of putting in the work to get there. And so, yeah, one of the interesting pieces about the projections was we were going after the Humeras of the world saying we're going to land that contract, and it's not a reasonable thing to say out the gate.
Yeah. So Unipen is looking to revolutionize this the injection experience. Can you help us understand the technological innovations that kind of set Unipen apart from some of the traditional approaches that are out there in the market?
Yeah. So going back to the patient-centric design, I kind of previously talked about those two pain points: how quickly needles are inserted and how quickly or slowly medication is administered out of that device. So those pain points, right, are preventing patients from continuing their medications. And so you won't ever have a 100% capture rate, but right now auto-injector devices are about 70% adherence. And so there's 30% where you could definitely improve that.
That seems high to me.
Oh yeah, I mean it's much higher than syringe and vial, which is below 50%.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, these auto-injectors have done a tremendous job of at least getting it somewhere consistent. And these are life-saving for chronic health conditions, things like, so patients have to be taking these, but there's still a 30% cap in patients taking them, which is insane to me.
Yeah.
And so in developing the device for patients, we just wanted to provide control of the injection process to patients. That meant how quickly needles were inserted and how quickly medication was ejected, right? So very simple. If you think about just administering a medication out of a syringe, you control that entire process. What we did differently was we took that concept of administering things manually out of a syringe, but applied all the concepts that auto-injectors bring. Hiding the needle, preventing patients' ability to accidentally stick themselves or their care provider from sticking themselves, the accidental opportunity to reuse a syringe, right, or dosing the medication out incorrectly. All of these problems are what auto-injectors solve, but they created more problems. And so in allowing patients to control the entire injection process, what we actually developed and didn't identify at the time was it was the first therapeutic agnostic injection device, meaning you don't have to undergo 5-year R&D timelines. You don't have to invest tens of millions in upfront development of these devices. You can put almost any subcutaneous injected product into our device with no R&D timelines and no upfront investment. And what that allows is you to open up who can apply that device to which medications. So I think an interesting example is genetic rare diseases, right? There's not enough doses of those types of medications being sold annually for them to make that investment into an injection device. But what we're able to do is, because there is no upfront investment in developing that device, you can apply our product to those genetic rare disease solutions and provide those patients a better experience, one that they can adhere to and take consistently without being concerned about over or under dosing or accidentally sticking themselves. So it was going back to that patient-centric design, is control the process, and that's what we gave.
Is there a gap? I mean, it's, I guess as someone who's not in the medical field, who's not in life sciences, to think about this as, we always think about the efficacy of drugs. Like, that's the challenge is, can we create a drug that addresses the issue, whatever issue is, right? Whether it's cancer, whether it's some medical condition or some disease. What we don't think about, I guess, is delivery. The steps to get the drug where it needs to be, in the way it needs to be in the body, those types of things. Is this is this a gap, or is this aside from what you're doing, are there other opportunities, other things that you see where delivery and some of these other things that drive adherence, that there's still big opportunities to make those improvements?
Tremendously. I think this is a problem. Adherence to medications, access to medications, isn't really something we've looked at in previous decades, right? So it's relatively new innovation. And so you think about the insulin auto-injector is a great example, right? Companies like Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly are no longer putting insulin in insulin pens. And at first you go, well, why are you not doing that, right? Well, it's because there's on-body insulin administration systems now. They check your blood glucose and they just administer the insulin. The patient doesn't have to give it to themselves. They don't have to do the finger pricks every day. And so, there is tremendous amounts of innovation occurring. Adherence to medications and access to medications is an area where we will always be able to improve. Particularly being in Kansas, Western Kansas has a very difficult time accessing medications, right? And so there's a lot of problem sets there that we're looking at solving as well. But the market's tremendously packed with opportunity. Where
do you see this going in the next decade? Where do you see this, landscape of patient-administered drugs? What do you see evolving over the next 10 years?
Yeah, so the market is transitioning to home health, right? So again, access to medication. If a patient has to drive to the hospital once a week, once a month, once a year to take their medication, the chances of them doing that are pretty slim. Many patients don't have access to a car, right? Many patients have to adjust their schedule to get on the bus to get to the hospital or the clinic to go and administer that. So a large portion of medications are transitioning to being home administered. Another large portion of medications are transitioning to injectables, particularly the biologic medications, right, are a big one right now. And so those kind of two things combined, home health and injectable medications, is kind of our sweet spot. There is some interesting innovation that we've actually been working on in this injectable administration space, where we can detect the exact timestamp that somebody has administered their drug product. And you think, what is the value in that one data point, right? But there's lots of applications for that. The first is, maybe your grandpa or grandma is on an injectable medication, maybe an injectable blood thinner, and you don't know if they're taking it every day or not, right? And so if we can tell you if they have or haven't, we can notify you. Say, hey, you should check in on grandma or grandpa, right? And you can take that a step further. So I have an app on my phone. It's called Know Your Drive. It tells me how good of a driver I am or bad of a driver I am, depending on
that app?
Who you are. But no, the great part about that app is it gives me discounts on my car insurance, right? You can do the same thing with this timestamp, right? So if patients are taking their medications consistently, insurance providers are more than happy to give them a discount on their copays for that medication, because it's going to prevent the patient likelihood of them going to the hospital to need, medical bills of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay, this is where the intersection between interview and lived experience hits me in the face. I set an alarm on my phone that goes off at 7 a.m. every morning and at 5 p.m. every day to remind me to take my heart medication.
Yep.
Right? And oftentimes I'll be somewhere like this. and I'll hit snooze, and then finally I'll be like, all right, every 9 minutes I can't keep hitting snooze, so I'll just hit stop.
Yep.
And then later on I'm like, did I remember to take that
You
or
don't
not?
know. Yeah.
I don't know. What you're saying is I could be getting a notification that says, yes, in fact, Kevin, you did take this.
Yep. Yep.
Rest easy, my friend. You did take your drugs. You are fine.
And you saved $5 the next time you have to pay for that medication as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Let me know when that's available for the drugs that I take too.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I want to transition a little bit to leadership. We've talked, I think, through kind of entrepreneurship, the technology, and some of the societal things I think that you've had to embed into the business to get the user experience and the product design. I mean, were you thinking about leading a company, leading an organization? What has that leadership journey looked like for you in terms of leading life sciences as a company?
Yeah, I've kind of always been in leadership roles to some capacity, founding Research Funding Network in undergraduate. I co-founded a group, Kansas City Biotechnology and Pharmaceutical Initiative, where the entire premise was to maintain basically the talent that we are minting out of our local universities that are interested in biotech and pharma, but end up having to go to the coasts to really explore those careers, right? And so that think tank was filled with MDs, PhDs, MBAs, master's students, JD, so lawyers, all these different high caliber, high achieving individuals that were all interested in the space. And so that was quick learning on how to lead, very capable people, right? And so I've always kind of been in these leadership positions to some extent. As a transition to Love Life Sciences, the goal when we started building the product wasn't to build this massive company, right? It wasn't to go and lead tons of people. It was, here's a problem that we are going to go and solve. And it truly started by me, utilizing my student loans to help purchase a 3D printer. And Bradley, my co-founder, using his funds to help purchase the payments for developing the intellectual property. And so it was just us taking horrible risks at the time, right? Incredibly risky things to do. But it's just us trying to solve this problem that begot what came after that.
So we're talking about the innovation paradox. We were talking about leading innovation within an organization and so on. What leadership principles do you find most effective or valuable in terms of leading innovation in an organization?
Yeah, I think you hit on one of the biggest ones that I consistently see is that a lot of people think that innovation is just applied to the product, right? And that is not the case at all. I think a great example of how innovation can be applied in other areas of the business is how it turns out this innovation in the product, patient control, allowed us to apply our device to multiple different therapeutics at once, which enabled us to look at different markets that nobody had ever tapped before, right? And so innovating not just on the product, but on the business application, the market dynamics, is something that we continuously tell everybody that they need to be a part of. Because God forbid the engineering team has a great idea about the business, or the business team has a great idea about the engineering side of things, but they don't get to collaborate, they don't get to communicate those types of innovations to each other. And so you have to remove that siloed thinking of one or the other. You have to inform everybody there are tons of ways to innovate. Everybody should be thinking in this manner, and then tell us when you have great concepts that you can apply to different aspects of the business that aren't necessarily your wheelhouse.
We used to intentionally bring people in that had no experience in what we were working on. And when we first started doing it, there was a lot of, why we need to go find an expert to come in and advise us. And it was like, well, no, we need to find someone that has no bias and no baseline for this to come in and just tell us what they think. Like tell us, it was always amazing the innovative ideas and perspectives that you would get out of that experience. Yeah. Because people, and I think we forget innovation is not invention. It's, reusing existing things in different ways. And to have somebody that's on the outside be, well, have you even thought about turning it over? Yeah. And why would we turn it over? That's not the way it works. And it's, no, try it. I don't know, from my perspective, it just looks like if you turned it over, it would work. And sometimes it's just those easy, kind of perspectives and pieces of feedback.
There's a book, I think it's called, it's the development of technology, or the innovation of technology. I'll have to go back and I'll let you know what it is. But essentially they talk about how innovation comes about kind of as a tree, right? So If we didn't have the wheel and we didn't have the motor, we would have never had the automated car, right? But without the wheel, we would have never thought about needing a motor to apply it to a car. So all these different pieces of innovation need to come from different aspects and different people and different ways of thinking, right? So when you bring that third party in that doesn't know anything about what you're building, gosh, you can smash new innovation in there, right? And another great example of this is how we went through our FDA process, right? So we took a novel approach to FDA. Arguably, we kind of developed our own FDA pathway. But we were told by consultants, by people in the industry, this is the one pathway you have to go through every single time. It doesn't matter. And it turns out that's not the case at all. We were just naive, thinking differently about the process, and we went through the FDA regulatory pathway in a completely different manner that turned out to be preferential for us. So yeah, just the outside perspective is sometimes everything.
Yeah, for sure. I would encourage more people to bring just those outsiders in, and it might feel awkward or uncomfortable because they don't have the baseline, and they'll say the things where you're like, yeah.
Yep.
But every now and then they'll bury a nugget in there that just you hadn't thought about, and it's so obvious in hindsight.
Evolution of Technology is the book I was thinking of.
Okay, The Evolution of Technology. All right, we will bookmark that one. Nick, reflecting on your entrepreneurial journey, right? Like where you started, where you're at, where you think you're going, what advice would you give to medical students that are, thinking about embarking on their own entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, de-risk your life as much as possible before you take a massive risk.
Say more.
So there was a decision I had to make coming out of medical school. Was I going to go pursue this pathway where, it was there, right? So I trained in medicine. I could go get a residency. I could make a 6-figure salary, live a beautiful life, impact people and patients, and do all of the things that I had set out to do. Or I could take this massive leap of faith, having raised very little money at all, can't pay myself anything. We don't have the intellectual property, no FDA submission, no product on the market, none of that stuff. Just take this massive leap of faith. And that's what I did. But I knew I had multiple backstops, other organizations that had offered jobs and all that stuff. And so I had plans A through F kind of planned out, right? So if you're a medical student interested in innovation, or anybody interested in innovation, know that the likelihood of that being a success are very slim. And you as the entrepreneur will have multiple shots on goal. Keep taking those shots, but don't go down a path of no return if you do not have a backfall.
That's fascinating. That's contrary to some advice I've heard given before of, don't have a plan B. Because if you have a plan B, then it's too easy to quit. And we talk about grit and resilience and the need to persist as an entrepreneur. So it's fascinating to hear, you had, B through F kind of opportunities. What do you say to that? Like this idea of not having like grit and resilience and knowing this is your path and knowing you have to do this. It didn't work out for you that way, but it seems like it could be easier for others to say, oh, this is hard. So I'm going to give up because I do have plan B and plan C. And
I will say it's probably a different way of thinking that I have than a lot of other people, right? I think it's I know I'm going to make the type of impact I'm driving to in my life. And I knew that becoming a physician was not going to do that for me. And I knew that there were other avenues to do this, right? But I think that you also have to understand that your startup is very likely to fail. Everybody's is, especially in those earliest days where nothing has been de-risked. And for you to put yourself in a position where you're standing on a piece of paper that could just be pulled out from underneath you and there's nothing below you to go and take the next step to go build the next thing, right? I think that's a very counterintuitive way to think about building a company, right? If the entire purpose is to de-risk everything, the first thing you need to de-risk is you, right? You have to, in my opinion, you have to have that backup, because if you don't, yeah, you might have this awesome drive to go build this incredible thing, but just because you have that drive, right, doesn't necessarily mean that that thing is going to do what you set out to achieve, right? I think you were kind of talking about earlier how you can always find success, right, if you just keep driving in. And I agree, you can find success, but there's different degrees of success when you do those things, right? If you try and shove a square peg into a hole, after years and years and years, you can whittle that wooden square peg into that hole, right? It's not going to be the product that you set out to do, or not going to be the solution necessarily that you set out to produce, but it's going to be doing something, right? And so from my perspective, yeah, de-risk yourself so that people can bet on you to take the next leap of faith and the next risk that's involved in the process.
Yeah, it's a great take on that. The idea that you have to be in a solid place, solid foundation as a founder to be able to build on top of, because you're building on top of your shoulders.
Yeah, but I also think that comes from a stance of, I was put in a good place in life, right? I'm very, very, very fortunate for the family I have, the support system that I have, and so I get to say those things, and because I lived having that great support, and knowing that I myself was de-risked, but not everybody is in that position at all. And so I encourage you, if you're not in that position, that doesn't mean you can't go and build things. It's just to say, make sure you have a game plan for what's next and what you would have to do if everything were to fall apart, right? So yeah, I'm very privileged to be able to say that kind of thing.
Yeah. What can you share about what's next? Like, where do you want Love Life Sciences to be in 18 months and 5 years? What's in game for you on this?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of things kind of in the pipeline that we've been working up. So one of the most, I think, interesting things to the audience, a big problem we actually had to solve, right? So let me kind of paint this picture. For our clients, these pharmacies, they're filling about 4, 5, 6 doses of medication into a vial and then just shipping that out. And what we were coming to them saying was, we have this device, you put 1 dose in this device. And so for that patient, you're going to need to send 4 to 6 different devices, right? Which is very common in the pharmaceutical industry to have to send that many. The problem wasn't how many they would have to send. They were telling us, look, we are all in on this product. We are all in, we need this. But that's going to 4, 5, 6x the amount of labor that we have to deploy to produce these products. And we can't manage that. And so that was a problem where we go, wow, okay, we can't overcome that on pricing. We can't overcome that on just the Unipen product alone. And so we went out and searched for a solution. Is there any way we can improve this process? And there wasn't. There was no process that would solve this specific problem that we were facing. And so we started developing our own. And so what we did was we took the concepts from major pharmaceutical filling lines. They're called fill finish. It automatically fills the product, finishes the product, labels it, and ships it out. We took those concepts and shrank them down into effectively what we're calling a drug 3D printer. And so this drug 3D printer can produce the product into the syringes and close the syringes up and send them out. And for a very nominal investment, something that it would blow everybody's mind at how little it costs us to produce this, you can produce 2 million injectable drug units by pressing a button.
Oh, wow.
And so what that has enabled, right, is us to sell more Unipen, right, the base product of the company. But really what does that system allow you to do is remove massive administrative overhead on getting these products to market. That allows you to drive down drug costs and improve access to medications as well. And so what we're looking at now in terms of this concept of automated fill finish, and the product I had previously alluded to where we can detect the last moment a medication is administered, we can take the concept of the last point that medication was administered, send a text to that patient and say, hey, do you need a script refill? Press Y. Right, so the patient presses Y the moment they've administered their product. They don't have to go to Walgreens or Walmart. They don't have to do anything extra. But then that gets processed into our fill finish system automatically, fills our product automatically, and you can ship out that product for next day shipping. The patient receives their next fill of script at their front door. And you could do this entire process in an automated, lights-off fashion. And so without intending to, that's kind of where we found ourselves coalescing around is a drug vending machine where you can place these in low-income communities and in isolated communities and produce product for these patients that absolutely need these, that don't have access to them otherwise.
Yeah, it sounds like this was an element of feedback that you got that made you pursue this path versus actually looking at the value chain and seeing where the weak spots in terms of delivery were. Am I hearing that right? Or have you had the opportunity to sit down and say, all right, where's the adjacency? Where's the next thing? How can we take this next block of the value chain and expand that way? I think that's a common strategy amongst growth entrepreneurs is to say, we can grow the company this way by establishing another element of the value chain.
Kind of working up or down the supply chain. We want to, all those things. I think those are great models. What we have identified is are you familiar with what a fractal is? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for those of you that don't know what a fractal is, If you look at a snowflake and you zoom in on that snowflake, it's made up of tiny snowflakes, and those are made up of tiny snowflakes as well. It's a repeating unit. It occurs naturally. What we realized, what we were doing, was we were innovating in a fractal manner. And so if you think about Unipen, our single-use device, kind of at the top of this vertical line, you can either apply a new market to that product to drive new revenue stream, or you can apply a new innovation to that product, right? A new product innovation, or you can apply a new product to support driving revenues. And so you can do this in perpetuity forever and ever and ever, finding new markets, finding new supportive technologies just for Unipen. But incidentally, what we did with our fill finish systems, right, this drug 3D printer, was enabling revenues for Unipen. It turns out that drug 3D printer is by itself a standalone product that then you can innovate in perpetuity on. And so what we've done is we are not looking at different value adds throughout the chain. We are looking at new ways to drive revenue for our core product, right? And so everything that we are doing, whether it's this fill finish system or whether it's this timestamp point, it's all to drive revenues at our core business model. And incidentally, what that does is it creates out this suite of products that really are standalone products, but then when combined, have tremendous impacts.
It's fascinating. Outside of your specific field, human injection, self-administered drugs, if you could design any medical device without limitations, no matter how futuristic, unconventional, what would it be and why?
There's a lot of them. My book over there in my backpack is probably filled with way too many.
Is this a notebook? Is this like, or is this?
I have like a library of just notebooks every day, dated, signed, all of that. But there's two interesting innovations that are probably happening now that I've waited enough time to have them sit in my notebooks. The first is intercontinental surgery, right? So you have these Da Vinci robots that are already installed in all of our local hospital systems. That's effectively remote surgery. Now, the difficult part about that is the latency period on those systems, that basically the Da Vinci robot that you're sitting in has to be in the same room as the patient. In actuality, that doesn't have to be the case. If you can solve for the latency, the lag time between me moving my hand here and the robot moving its hand there. And so what you could presumably do if you solve this latency problem set is you could have the President of the United States in Washington, D.C. getting surgery by the best neurosurgeon in the world in California. And you can absolutely solve those problems relatively simply. I think another interesting medical initiative that I know is being pursued right now is leveraging drone technologies to deliver organs. So organ transplant is a very interesting problem set right now, where you basically have a very specific period of time to get that organ from one individual to the patient that's accepting that organ. And if you're not within that window, right, that time window where you can access that, you're not going to get that organ.
This is the nuclear football challenge, right? You got the cooler with the thing in it, and I got to get it from here to here, and it's like, you're in the traffic jam, you're in the, all the series of things that prevent you from meeting that window.
Exactly. And so, like, every single one of our local hospitals knows if you are outside of this hospital region, we're just not even going to contact you about this organ. And so you have patients that have amazing organs that could be transplanted to people across the United States that, we just can't get it there in time. And so you can look at, and we've kind of solved for some of the smaller problem sets where you can take a drone off of a hospital, deliver that organ across state lines and expedite that process so that you can expand that radius of where you can deliver that organ. And so that's just another interesting medical innovation that I've looked at and gone, wow, that'd be great if that could be solved for, and people are trying to do it now.
Yeah, that's great. That's fascinating. I mean, we talk about rural access, the lack of rural hospitals, the closing down. I was actually, I graduated from Dodge City, and you just think about the number of the challenges that rural communities have getting health care. Sometimes you have to drive 100, 150 miles just to go see a physician or go to a hospital. Or if something emergency happens, you're just out of luck. I mean, there's nothing, within a radius that you can get to in time. So this is a fascinating type of innovation, but it's good to hear that people are thinking about those things. So Nick, I want to ask you, I ask everybody this question: dumbest idea you've ever come up with where people laughed at you that ended up being genius?
That ended up being genius.
Yeah, that ended up working.
An injection device.
Okay, that's the easy answer. Okay.
No, I think it's most of my stupid ideas I figure out are stupid pretty quick because I'm pretty vocal about my ideas, right? It's the fail fast concept, right? Is go sell this to people, and if people don't want it, then you don't want it. God, I probably have dozens. I'm trying to think of a good one for you guys. I initially had a concept, gosh, this would have been years ago as well, basically for a phone app, kind of like a game where you can level up in the game, but really what you were doing was achieving milestones, personal milestones in your real life, right? For those, well, I used to be a major World of Warcraft player, like nationally ranked World of Warcraft player when I was in middle school, right? And so a lot of my motivation throughout my early childhood was around leveling up and making things better, right? Getting myself better. And so I put those two concepts together and thought, wow, this would be a great idea. No one wants to level up a virtual character because they're achieving things in real life. That's just not, this is not a thing.
Yeah, trying to level up in life.
That's
the goal, right? You had just said something. So, I forget what exactly you had just said. You were talking about, coming up with the ideas, and how many ideas that you've come up with, and the idea of manifesting ideas. I think it's the idea of saying them out loud. I know a lot of people who are afraid to say the things out loud. It seems like you're the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest piece of advice, and I live and die by this, biggest piece of advice for anybody wanting to be an entrepreneur is write down your idea. Don't just verbalize it. Because when you think about something, it could seem great, it sounds great. You have not defined what the heck that thing is until you try and put pen to paper. And when you start writing out what this thing is, you realize pretty quickly, I haven't defined, I have no clue what I've been thinking about. And so step one is just write every idea you have down. And if you can define it, then you at least have somewhere to go off of to then share it with people. And then share it with people. Because they'll tell you, hey, this isn't something I'd buy, this isn't something I want, this isn't a problem I have, you're barking up the wrong tree, whatever it is. But it's kind of the early phased approach of, you have a great idea, put it down on paper, define it, share it with people, see what their feedback is.
Yeah, ideas are only valuable when they've been shared. I try to explain that to people. Don't keep it close, let it out.
Yeah, don't be afraid of people stealing your idea, because chances are, if they haven't already, they're probably not.
And execution is the value block, right? Execution is the goal, not just the idea itself. That's great. Nick, so I want to ask one more question, and then I want to make a statement about something I've observed about you over time, in the limited time that I've known you or known of you in this area. But the question, I guess, is around fellowship. So I know that you have had an opportunity to be around other entrepreneurs in the work that you've done and in the exposure that you've gotten as an entrepreneur and so on. What's that benefit been like to be the fellowship of fellow entrepreneurs, even ones that maybe aren't in your space, in your field? Walk through that a little bit.
So the first thing I will tell people is, as a founder that's kind of going through all those group settings, one of the biggest fears that you have is other people are doing it faster, other people are doing things better, other people are raising money and I'm not, all these comparisons to everybody. And that should not be something that you're worried about. That's your cohort. Those are the people there to support you through the hardest times, right? They're also the people that, if they have started achieving those things, you should probably be learning from those people as well. So do not be afraid if you're in a room with people that have achieved things with their startup that you haven't, and don't be breaking down because of that. I will say that without the other entrepreneurs, founders, and the exit entrepreneurs and the successful ones as well, giving feedback and direction and guidance, we wouldn't be here. I think without hearing that everybody else is having just as difficult a time raising money, you think, gosh, I've shot every shot I have and I'm not getting anything. Well, it turns out the next door you knock on might actually be the one, right? So they're there for support. They're there for you to sit down and cry about some of the worst moments you've had, right? But they're also the ones that you get to brag to each other about these things, where most people don't want to know how the sausage is made. They don't want to know how a startup actually functions. They want to see the cool product at the end of the day that makes tons of money.
Yeah.
But the people that care about the process, the people that understand the plight that you're going through, are your other entrepreneurs. And so you get to commiserate with them in the hard times and celebrate in the good times.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I enjoy seeing, and I always say, we can talk about access to funding, capital, we can talk about access to resources and talent and the things. Access to fellowship, we always talk about entrepreneurship as a lonely journey. I think that's the most undervalued resource that you can make available to entrepreneurs is proximity to fellowship. You shouldn't have to go get it. It should just be something that's somewhat natural and organic.
And
right?
that's something and so that kind of leads me into one of the major problem sets I see right now at the local universities or university as a whole, particularly in academia and in medical products, right? Is you have all this support to be, in the medical sense, a physician or a practitioner, right? But you have no support on how to innovate. You're not really taught that. That's not part of the culture of our local universities yet. And we're doing a lot of things to resolve those things. But the fellowship of people just talking about innovation is tremendously impactful. You're not a weirdo for being incredibly creative in surgery, right? Like, this is a great concept. You should pursue this. But when you don't have that, it stifles that type of thought as well. So just a little piece there from local universities that I'm kind of been trying to work on.
Yeah, no, it's. I think we all see that. Research commercialization is a struggle. A lot of it is because of the culture inside of those institutions around what innovation could or could not be, if it's accessible to them, what's it look like. I sense that in the life sciences field, there is so much regulation and rigor, and you can't screw up. And so there's this, this discipline that has to be instilled, and anything outside of that discipline is viewed as dangerous.
Yeah. Risky. And I think that a lot of it too is like, think about the context of somebody developing a cancer therapeutic, right? So kind of going back to where I was at, you are likely a PhD that's been doing this for decades of your life. This is all you know is developing cancer therapeutics, testing them in rat models, and turns out it doesn't work. And you're back to the drawing board until something happens, right? Something exciting happens. What do you do next? Because the past 20, 30 years of your life have been just this one thing, and now you broke past that barrier. What do you do next? Nobody knows, right? There are people that know and you should go talk to, but when you don't have the culture of commercialization, tech transfer, and doing those things, that's a lot of the time where the technology ends up stopping. And so, universities like KU Med have hundreds of patents in what I call their patent locker that nobody's doing anything with because they have brilliant minds develop it, but nobody there to help pull those brilliant minds to start actually commercializing it.
Well, hopefully we start fixing some of that. I know there's a lot of work going into that.
Yes.
I think I've been engaged in some of it here recently, and hopefully we'll be some more so soon. And I think we forget commercialization. The bulk of commercialization happens with large industry. It doesn't happen with startups. So kudos to the work that you're doing. It's the harder part of this. It's only like 15% of commercialization that happens in new venture creation. The rest of it happens through corporate engagement, and we need to build the corporate engagement to continue to build those opportunities and those off-ramps.
Absolutely.
For commercialization as well. And so hopefully we'll continue to do that. So Nick, the observation I made, it's so clear that you are a Kansas City, that you are a Kansan, that you are, it's so amazing to watch your advocacy for either the university, the state, the city, the things that you believe in. And I just wanted to say thank you for that, because I think for us to build an ecosystem, it's important not only that we retain our, we talk about brain drain, entrepreneurial brain drain as well. It's easy for our entrepreneurs, especially in your field, to think of Boston or Cleveland or, Nashville or, and now Oklahoma City even, these cities that have gotten this investment and that are moving forward as these hubs and these things. So for you to continue to demonstrate that dedication to this region and to your work and keeping it here, thank you. It's important. It's important to all of us, whether we're in your field or not. So, again, thanks. And thanks for sharing your story with us. Thanks for sitting down and doing this. I appreciate it. And I'm going to hold you to that, let's bring you back and talk about, where you're at, in a year, where you're at as you continue to hit some of these milestones, because it's impressive to watch.
Perfect. I appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you for the time, and thank you guys for all listening. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate it.